Today is the second in my series on Chinatown, and we're going to be talking about some of the architecture, the 1906 earthquake, some of the history of Chinatown. It's such an interesting place. We're starting here at the Dragon's Gate, and the Dragon's Gate was built in 1970 to kind of enhance the tourist attraction of Chinatown. Like most Chinese ceremonial gates, this one has three entrances. The center gate is for the cars and the two on either side for pedestrians. It's guarded by two dragons. Now the dragons are not the same. The one on the left, this one, is a male dragon, and he has his paw on a ball. His job is to guard the gates. The translation of the saying over his gate is "Trust Peace." The dragon on the right is a female, and she has her paw on a young cub. Her job is to protect those within the gates. And the translation of the saying atop her gate is "Respect, love." The translation of the saying over the center gate, the one for the cars, reads, "All under the heaven is for the good of the people." So let's go inside and check it out. Here's a Google map of Chinatown. I know it's hard to read, but stick with me, it will be clearer. At the bottom is the Dragon's Gate, and the main road is Grant Avenue. I'm going to rotate this and overlay the official city map of Chinatown from 1880. Grant Avenue was called DuPont Street in 1880. This map is color-coded. Pink are the gambling houses. Yellow are the opium dens. Green is Chinese prostitution. Blue is white prostitution. Red are the joss houses. Now, a joss house is what they called pagan worship, or in other words, a Taoist temple or a Buddhist temple. Everything else, this predominant beige color, is a general Chinese business. We're going to start here at the corner of California and Grant. This is Old St. Marys Cathedral. It is a Catholic church that was built in 1891, and it is the second oldest church in San Francisco that is still in operation. When the 1906 earthquake hit, everything in Chinatown either collapsed or was burned as part of the fire, except for this structure. This is the only structure that remained in Chinatown. Now, the interior burned, but the outside structure did not. So this is the same structure that was built in 1891. Right across from Old St. Mary's Cathedral is the Sing Chong and the Sing Fat buildings. When the 1906 earthquake destroyed Chinatown, San Francisco officials thought this was a great opportunity to get rid of the Chinese. They could just move them to far out of town as possible, because this is prime real estate. But the Chinese didn't want to go. So a Chinese businessman came up with a proposal, and he said, "We will hire non-Chinese architects to rebuild here in a Chinese style to make it a tourist destination, so people will come to San Francisco and come here as a tourist destination." And so the officials agreed to that. The Sing Chong and the Sing Fat buildings are the first two. The architect was from Scotland. Now, these curved roofs, this is what you think of as Chinese architecture, right? Not exactly. This is the type of architecture that you would see in Chinese temples, but not part of Chinese business or everyday life. But still, this is what we as Westerners viewed as Chinese architecture. So you'll see a lot of that in Chinatown. So when the Chinese came over to this country, they came from the same province in Canton. So Cantonese is the primary dialect spoken here. All other dialects of the Chinese are spoken, Mandarin and any of the others, but originally it was just the Cantonese. Now, the Chinese have always been discriminated against, even today, as you know. So they couldn't count on the government and any officials to protect them. So they had to organize themselves, and they organized themselves into two primary groups. The first was called family associations. A family association, anyone could join, and it was based on your family name. So anyone who had the name Lin would belong to the Lin Family Association. And if you had the family name Chong, you would belong to the Chong Family Association. Second type of organization is called a Tong. A Tong is a private organization, and you were invited to join the Tongs. It is the Tongs that were responsible for enforcement here in Chinatown, the gambling dens, the opium dens, the prostitution, and in general criminal activity. And they were active in criminal enterprises through the 1970s and 80s. They have cleaned up now and they are just private organizations. But this is the very first Tong in San Francisco and the oldest still in operation. It is the Qigong Tong. So what do you notice about the emblem for the Qigong Tong? It looks like a Mason symbol, right? They wanted to fit into American culture, so they opted that symbol and used it as their own. I'm in Ross Alley. In the first video, I showed you a picture that was taken here in 1898 by Albert Ginth, and at the time I said you couldn't tell which end of Ross Alley it was taken from. Well, I was totally wrong about that, and I would have known it if I had just taken a look at this map. The other end of the alley where I thought it was taken actually had a different name, so it was taken from this end of the alley. And the name of the photograph is called Street of Gamblers by Day. And if you take a look at the map, look how many gambling dens were in this area. Today, Ross Alley is known mostly for the Golden Gate Fortune Cookie Company, which unfortunately is closed right now because of the pandemic. But that is where they make fortune cookies. You can go in and watch them make it. You can't film inside unless you buy some fortune cookies, which I did. I bought some of the X-rated fortune cookies, but they're not really X-rated. They are, and they're also not fortunes. They are just cute little sayings. They're maybe a little risque. I don't think so. Some of the sayings that I got were, give man enough rope and he'll claim he's tied up at the office, or marriage is a good deal like taking a bath. Not so hot once you get used to it. And this one, men who can read women like a book usually like to read in bed. From Ross, we're going to walk half block down the street to St. Louis Alley. Take a look down this alley. What do you see? It's just an ordinary alley, right, that dead ends into some apartment buildings. But this alley used to be where they had the slave auctions. Not African American slaves. This is where they auctioned off Chinese girls. Only men immigrated from a province in Canton. So if only men immigrated, how did they have Chinese prostitution? The Tongs would go back to Canton and they would go to the families that had young girls and say, there's opportunity in America. We can teach your daughter to be a seamstress, to be a housekeeper. And the families would sell the daughter to the Tongs. The Tongs would bring them here, smuggle them here illegally, and auction them off at the end of this alley. And let me point out, these auctions occurred in broad daylight after the end of the Civil War, when slavery was deemed illegal. Young Chinese girls auctioned in this alley. From here, we go back to Grant Avenue, and then we turn down Washington Street. Behind me is the old Chinese Telephone Exchange building. Chinatown started its own telephone exchange in 1887 and opened at this location in 1901. In 1906, it was destroyed as part of the earthquake and the fire, so they rebuilt this building in 1909. Now remember, they wanted to make Chinatown a tourist destination, so not only was the building meant to look like traditional Chinese architecture, they had the women inside who worked at the telephone exchange wearing the qi pao, which is a traditional silk Chinese fitted dress. Tourists would come here, they would get out, they would go and they would look in the windows and watch these women working. Right now it's an east-west bank. You can see the architectural details that are in these old pictures are still there. Our next stop is a very special location on Waverly Place. This inauspicious door is an entrance to the Hau Temple. The Hau Temple was founded in this location in 1852, making it the oldest Taoist temple in San Francisco and one of the oldest Chinese temples still in operation in the United States. Visitors are welcome to the temple. It is closed now because of the pandemic. They don't allow you to take pictures, and they just ask that you respect the people who are worshiping there. Behind me is the Chinese Historical Society, but that is not what makes this building special. This used to be the YWCA, and it was designed by architect Julia Morgan. If a woman wants to be an architect today, nobody bats an eye. But Julia Morgan got her license in 1904. Women were not even allowed to vote. And for a woman to get an architect, she was truly a pioneer in the field. She's most known for building Hearst Castle in San Simeon for William Randolph Hearst. But this is one of the buildings that she designed here in San Francisco, and the lamp outside is one of her original designs. Behind me is the Cameron House, which you have probably never heard of before. This was founded back in the late 1800s by the Presbyterian Church, and it was called the Occidental Mission Home for Girls. And its mission was to help Asian girls escape prostitution. In 1895, a young woman named Donaldina Cameron came here as a sewing instructor, and 2 years later, she was their superintendent. She realized that the problem of Chinese slavery and Chinese prostitution was bigger than she ever thought. And she decided to make it her life's mission to rescue these girls and help them find better lives. You have probably heard of Oskar Schindler from Schindler's List. He's credited with saving 1,200 Jews from the Holocaust. Donaldina Cameron saved over 3,000 Chinese girls from slavery and prostitution. And you've probably never heard of her before. Don't ask me why. She has an incredible story to tell. This is a picture. It's believed to have been a staged photograph, but this is essentially what she would do. She would get some guys to help her, get a ladder. She would go to the houses of prostitution and help any girl who wanted to leave to escape. And then she would bring them here, teach them to read, and teach them skills where they really could choose a better life. Donaldina Cameron did so much to help these women over the years that they renamed the house in her honor. It is still a mission today, and it helps low-income Asian families. Also, I want to take a look at the unusual brick on the building. Now, here's a picture of the original building. Again, in the 1906 earthquake, the building was destroyed, and the fire department actually dynamited the original building because they wanted to try to create a firewall to keep the fire from going up the hill. That was unsuccessful. So when they rebuilt the building, they used as many of the bricks as they could. Some of them are burned in different and odd shapes. That is because they were burned in the 1906 earthquake. So that concludes the second video in my Chinatown series, and it's a good thing because it's starting to rain now and I want to go home. If you like this video, click the like button, subscribe if you want to see more. If you would like to see the first video in the series, click on it, and thank you for watching.